The liberal media and some aspects of the kind of conservative DC apparatus alike are both absolutely seething at Tucker Carlson right now. When do they not? What else is new? But you notice what's going on right now, the kind of hatred towards him, the vitriol towards him is a lot stronger than it normally is whenever he makes like whatever type of monologue or whatever. Specifically, we are discussing Tucker's kind of stances on this whole Ukraine, Russia border tension, whatever. Okay. And Tucker really has been raising a topic on his show, kind of a point on his show that we talk about a lot on this channel, which is very simple, I think. And it's the question of, should American foreign policy, should the thinking of the leaders in Washington still be centered around the Cold War notion that Russia is this big bad enemy? And it's like, if the kind of 21st century, big 21st century enemy is China, why is it exactly that we alienate a country like Russia, who theoretically could actually be a useful kind of ally in terms of trade and military force and whatnot against China, right? These are all very practical questions. But Tucker and I, so far as to go even a step further and say, really, that why exactly does the DC establishment really despise Vladimir Putin so much? And why is it that when you like remotely say that, maybe all the State Department propaganda, spread against Russia and the Russian government and Putin and whatever is just, is kind of slightly inaccurate? Why is it that you are so immediately and harshly ostracized, right? So Tucker's been asking the question, and I've been asking this very simple question. We're not in the Cold War anymore. So why exactly, you look at Russia and you look at kind of the way that Vladimir Putin governs his country, right? Russia's not a perfect country. Russia has a whole lot of problems, but you look at the direction that Putin is trying to take his country, okay? So first and foremost, Putin has openly said, and it reflects in his policy, that he believes that Christianity is the moral foundation of his country, right? It is the moral bedrock of his society. Putin does not outcast or alienate the Orthodox Church, the prominent church, Christian church in Russia. Putin does not go around alienating the church and saying the church has to stay out of politics. The church, Orthodox Christians should not have their beliefs in politics. The exact opposite. He tries to bring in the church, and he's affirmed that, his country is one nation under God, right? So, understanding that Putin believes that men are not women and that marriage is between a man and a woman, considering that Putin is against vaccine mandates, at least verbally, considering that Vladimir Putin is a guy who has gone out here and criticized wokeism, criticized cancel culture, right? Criticized sort of left-wing social ideology very vocally and said that it's a poison to his society and to Western society, and has warned the West that, this type of cultural leftism is something that's going to destroy your society. Okay. So considering that Vladimir Putin believes in strong borders and is actually much more of a nationalist when it comes to immigration policy and economic policy than the leaders in the United States, here's a genuine question. Why exactly, at least, should conservatives see Russia as such an enemy, such a foreign adversary? Okay. Like, I don't care if you disagree on this or that or what they do, or you don't like this aspect of their society. I don't think they're a perfect society either. But why do we exactly see this guy, or why do we see someone like, Viktor Orban, whoever else, to be such an enemy, such a brutal, anti-right wing, crazy fascist or whatever it is, right? And Tucker has been raising this very relevant question, why exactly don't we kind of see Russia as an out, or at least try to, be on good terms with Russia, first and foremost, because it's just not good to be at odds with another world power. You don't want that. I mean, generally speaking, you want a peaceful world stage, but also, on a practical sense, they're not as close to China as, they're often painted to be. That, they've grown closer to China because they've grown further away from us. But they're, that's not an unbreakable bond there. Why not, from a practical stance, doesn't the United States kind of come out here and say, Russia is a kind of a Christian society in the sense that they want Christian influence in their government. Hey, at least Republicans, or at least conservatives, hey, we kind of want the same thing too, don't we? Okay, well, I don't care like specifically how they're governing their country to any extent, but actually ideologically, we're not all that different. We have some differences, but we're not like super duper opposed to like, the Russian government or the Hungarian government or whatever. Why isn't there kind of this natural alliance between America and Russia? Why don't we see that, right? You have China, a country that persecutes Christians, a country whose official religion is state atheism. Putin is kind of like he's kind of like more of this, like, I don't know, religious, pro-religion. Like, he's not like a theocrat, but he's kind of like this pro-religion kind of like nationalist leader. Like, why shouldn't conservatives see that as something that's kind of friendly? Anyways, this is the question that Tucker Carlson has been sort of posing, right? Just why exactly do we have to hate Russia so much? And precisely for that, he's been getting incredible backlash from, first of all, let's talk about liberal media, and then we'll talk about, the neocon apparatus in DC. First of all, Sam Madsen says Vince is a neocon John Bolton asset. This is just drastically untrue. Okay, so but you see, you Google Tucker Carlson's name right now, and what you'll find because of that, because he raised this basic question, he asked the question. A lot of hit pieces on the guy. Okay, liberal media is going crazy, but really that has to make you question, because I know there's a lot of right wingers that are still kind of like, they still basically agree with the State Department, with the American regime, with liberal media, with the neoconservatives, right? There's still just a lot of people on the American right and the GOP and stuff that align like with, the regime narrative, with the kind of mainstream neoliberal narrative when it comes to Russia and when it comes to Vladimir Putin. So let me ask those people, right? Because I think this is the people we're really trying to reach. Do you think, look, I'm not saying that nothing that ever comes out of any source is reliable, but you really look at the people who are the most, adamantly anti-Putin in terms of, this stuff. And it's like, if you remotely say that he's not the biggest, baddest guy in the world, and he's not the mortal enemy of the United States, if you even like remotely say that, you're labeled a threat to democracy, and you should be cast out of society in general for even asking that question, right? Look at yourself. Where does this sort of rhetoric come from? Like, who are the people that are asking this? And you'll find out that if you're the people who are doing this, and you'll find out that the biggest, opponents basically of Putin, of Russia, of the concept of America and Russia being somewhat of like practical allies, right? The biggest detractors against that are also the biggest detractors against you, are they not? I mean, who is it? It is the political establishment. It is the sort of neoliberal political ruling class. It is the deep state, right? It is the kind of career bureaucrats in the State Department and our foreign policy institutions across DC. Like, it is precisely these people who are, the biggest, like, what threat to democracy? You can't like pose the question that, maybe Russia is not like the Soviet Union anymore, and it's not like our big bad nuclear enemy or whatever, right? So I think it's fair to ask the question, and I think it's fair to really start asking these questions. Is this something that's really true? Is this something that we should believe? Should we continue to toe the sort of propaganda lines of, the same exact people who deplatform us on social media, use like terrorist national security apparatus against us? Like, should we really be towing the same line as these people? Okay. And that's not to automatically say that means, Putin is a good guy or whatever, but I think it's time to really start asking these questions. Now, understandably, for asking these questions, like I just said, you are going to really get the brunt of it from the liberal media, and, a lot of, like I said, a lot of neocons in DC too, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay. So you have this, I don't even know this woman's name, but I'm sure you recognize her from CNN. I think she's on like the 3 or 4 o'clock news. Anyways, we're going to be reacting to this monologue and a few more other, liberal pieces here. And we have Keelar, if that's how you say her name. Okay. I don't know if that's how I don't know her name. I just know her face. Okay. But Keelar on Tucker Carlson, why is Fox airing anti-democratic BS? Like, there you go. Right. Does that not say anything? I mean, first of all, let me just say, based, very epic. Okay. Tucker Carlson being anti-democratic, Tucker Carlson undermining democracy. That's amazing. Okay. That's great. I fully stand with it. Democracy sucks. We're tired of the virtue signaling when it comes to democracy. Like, democracy is some god to be worshipped. Democracy is the most virtuous, we're going to defend our democracy. Like, really? And by the way, is that what we're doing? Is that what American soldiers going to Ukraine right now? Is that what they're defending? They're defending democracy. Okay. Let me say, first and foremost, I don't even find that concept virtuous. Okay. But even so, what exactly, like, I don't find the concept of democracy in general to be virtuous or something like amazing, worth to be defended. But like, even that aside, what do they mean exactly by democracy? Right. because, this is simultaneously as the political class, as the political establishment, and the Biden administration obviously abets, the mass immigration, both legal but largely illegal too, into our country, right? And so how exactly is that protecting democracy, the concept of democracy, when the actual people of this country are getting their votes drowned out, getting their sort of political voice replaced, erased by what's going on? But then you kind of get to the heart of it, like that's really what they believe democracy to be, right? Whereas the founding fathers sort of believed in like this selective, closed off republic, right, for these American people, what the political class in America basically believes is democracy, quote unquote. I mean, kind of democracy, right, for the entire world. Okay, but it really is the case though, when I don't know, American soldiers going to Ukraine right now. Like it's not necessarily going to get heated, but even if it does, like what exactly are they going off to defend? Like are they defending like the Constitution? Are they defending like the epic principles of the founding fathers? No. When we talk about anti-democracy and undermining democracy, it simply means that you don't want to toe the line for Pride Month, BLM, critical race theory, right? All the just feminism, right? All the just godless, terrible left-wing social movements. That's what kind of being anti-democratic means. But that's also to say that when these people get up here and say that, we're defending democracy abroad, I mean, that's really what they mean. But anyways, let's just get into this. Let's just start watching this, and I'll give more takes sort of as we go. But I think this will be pretty fun. So. Okay, we got a direct.
In the meantime, as tensions are ratcheting up between Russia and Ukraine, one Democratic congressman says his office is getting phone calls, repeatedly getting these phone calls, and they're from fans of Fox's chief propagandist, Tucker Carlson, saying that the U.S. should be siding with Russia over Ukraine. What, you may say? Well, you wouldn't be surprised if you watched his pro-Russia stance every night.
All of them are promoting.
It's very funny because Tucker's stance is not even being like pro-Russia, right? Tucker's stance is simply neutrality in the conflict, okay, which I think is a reasonable take. I think is the historically American take. But, we talked about this before, but it's very interesting to see the kind of liberal 180 on this topic, right? Traditionally, liberals in America, you go back to like the anti-Vietnam War protests and whatnot. It was traditionally at least, post-World War II, it has always been kind of the liberal stance that the liberal side has been more commonly associated with isolationism or at least being anti-war or whatever it is, right? Like Iraq, you look at the Iraq War, you look at the Vietnam War, you look at historically who the hippies have been that have protested against wars. It's been the liberals, quote unquote. Okay. Now, I would also argue that I think like a true understanding of conservatism is naturally nationalistic, right? Is naturally isolationist. But like, the historical political dichotomy over the past few decades has kind of been, liberals equal less pro-war, conservatives more pro-war, whatever. But obviously now you're kind of seeing liberalism sort of do a 180. Okay. And now you're basically seeing that it is liberals the most, at least the neoliberals, or at least kind of the liberal class, the liberal establishment shill the most for intervening in Ukraine or wherever else in the Middle East or whatever it is. And then when a conservative person gets up here and says like, well, why are we doing this? You'll see liberal media the most get up there and say isolationism is dangerous or whatever, right? What's up here? Well, I think that what the liberal kind of anti-war stance of the past few decades never really was genuine, right? What it more so was kind of out of this notion, this understanding, right? The reason why liberals, used to be kind of pro-civil liberties, kind of anti-government in a sense, right? In terms of like the regulating of morality or whatever, and anti-war was simply because the ideology of liberalism didn't really control the institutions, right? Now that liberals have control of the country, now that liberals have control of the government, the deep state, right, of the institutions, of the culture, whatever it is, now what you see is the natural end of liberalism or the natural end of leftism or whatever you want to call it, whatever you want to see it as. And that is the mass exporting of this ideology around the world. And so, like I talked about earlier, you know, we talk about BLM flags in Afghanistan and George Floyd murals in Afghanistan and feminism in Afghanistan, and, you know, all those things presumably to Ukraine and the rest of the Western world as well. That is like the end goal of liberalism. Like, I guess you could call that late stage liberalism. You know, it descends into globalism. Like, it always happens like this. But it's very interesting, you know, it's very interesting to see, you know, and like I said, that's really the end goal of this, is it not? And that's the real reason why they're so opposed to like Russian encroachment. It's like, because Russia is a country where, you know, gay marriage is illegal. Russia is a country where the kind of Orthodox Church has way more influence on the government, and the government's kind of favorable to them, right? It's a way more in terms of the government, not in terms of the society whole scale, but the government itself is far more conservative when it comes to policy, right, than the United States is, right? And precisely, I think that's the real reason why you see such like a radical opposition to, you know,
voting war against Russia on behalf of our new and deeply beloved ally, the government of Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is our most dangerous enemy, they scream. We can't let him hurt Ukraine. So it turns out Russiagate was actually more effective even than we'd realized. The Steele dossier has been debunked, but in Washington, the theme remains in force. Russia, 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 Russia is bad. Apparently, Ukraine's eastern border with Russia, unlike, say, our southern border with Mexico, is a sacred boundary created by God that must be protected at all costs, up to and including American lives. Why is it disloyal to side with Russia, but loyal to side with Ukraine? They're both foreign countries that don't care anything about the United States.
So true.
Kind of strange.
Easy answer there. One's a democracy, the other's a brutal autocracy. The real question
here. Okay. And, you know, you're gonna hear this line a lot, right? Any kind of notion of a Russo-American alliance, this is the line you'll always be fed, right? Russia is a brutal autocracy. Russia suppresses political dissidents. Russia, tampers with elections, right? Russia, there's no democracy or democratic elections in Russia, and it's like, okay. Okay, cool. Russia censors the internet, Russia. Yeah. Okay, guys. Okay. And really, I am going to die on the hill that I think that a lot of that's drastically exaggerated, right? The level of like political brutality or whatever in Russia, I don't think it's any worse than any other second world country. Frankly, I don't think it's even worse than the United States, if I'm going to be totally honest in terms of that stuff. I mean, I know people, they can't, the concept that the United States or anywhere else in the Western world is like ostensibly less free or like less healthy than anywhere in the Eastern world. I know that's like heresy to think like that, but like, I genuinely don't know if that's the case, but it's just like, even so, what did Tucker say? Not to side with Russia or Ukraine. That's not my stance either. It's to side with America. And quite frankly, it's none of America's business. But what do you see here? Liberals shilling for war, right? Because that's exactly what this is to them. We can't let the kind of Christian autocrat, nationalist, pro-family, anti-global corporation guy influence any part of the world. We got to make sure that gay, homosexual, transgender, black BLM, democratic flag democracy rules the entire world. Okay, we cannot let, so like I said, that's what this is. Okay, and that's what you're gonna see here. So maybe
why is Rupert Murdoch allowing this anti-democratic BS on the air there? Let's talk about all of this now with Democratic Congressman Tom Malinowski of New Jersey. He is on the House Foreign Affairs and Homeland Security Committees, among others. First, sir, and thank you for being with us this morning. Can you just tell us about these phone calls that your office is getting?
This is the most trusted name in news, right? They bring on a congressman who's like, yeah, I've been getting phone calls to my office. Like, okay. It's like, what, how is this a news story? Congressman gets phone calls to office from people who don't like him. This deserves a news segment. No, I mean, it's very weird. It's very weird. These people are weirdos.
Yeah, sure. It really started yesterday. I was in my district office in New Jersey, and phones were ringing, and my district director came to me and said, I just spent an hour on the phone with like 4 people telling me that they'd watched Tucker Carlson last night, and why are we going to be going to war for Ukraine? Russia's making reasonable proposals for peace, and we should just do what Russia wants. And, you know,
he even said it out loud. It's like, why are we going to war with Ukraine? Why aren't we like trying to make a reasonable compromise with Russia? These are the questions that his constituents are asking in his own words. And the response of this is like, you're a threat to democracy. This is anti-democratic, un-American propaganda. You know, is it though? Is the question of why are we, you know, suggesting the idea of like a military conflict that has no purpose and just a stupid war for neoliberalism. Why are we painting this conflict like Vladimir Putin is the most evil man to ever exist, and when that's just not really the way things are? Like, very simple questions, very reasonable questions. It is it is like a threat to democracy to ask these questions. First of all, I think that's a good thing. And I will say, to an extent, it is a threat to democracy. Democracy, of course, being, you know, the kind of political system they have set up, the kind of neoliberal false sense, I guess you could say, of democracy, whatever you want to call it. And it's very true. Like, questions like this are absolutely a threat to the current political system. I will grant them that, okay? Now, I will not grant them that the current political system is virtuous, because it's absolutely not. But yes, you're right. Questions like this are a threat to the current political system. It is absolutely a threat to the current political system to ask, you know, basic questions. Why do we care about Ukraine's borders more than we care about our own borders? You know, why exactly are we adversaries for like no reason, basically, with this country called Russia? You know, why should we have a stake or be involved in a conflict that like literally does not affect us whatsoever? You know, these types of very basic questions definitely are a threat to a political establishment who's like so far gone, right? So I guess you know what? Never mind. He's right. They're absolutely right. Okay. I wouldn't frame it as democracy, although I don't mind it being framed as democracy, because, you know, I think this really is what true democracy is. Like, you're seeing it, right? There's really no such thing as democracy, quote unquote, right? In any political system, there's going to be a ruling class and aristocracy. And, you know, that's what you see here, right? The people on, not just the people on CNN, but kind of the people behind them, the kind of mass scale neoliberal ruling class and neoliberal globalist control of all the institutions, right? That's who really controls this democracy, quote unquote. Okay. They really control, you know, the masses don't control themselves. The people don't think for themselves, or make decisions for themselves. You know, they're influenced entirely, and they're kind of basically controlled by all of the institutions that are run by the same people, run by the same, you know, ruling class. I wouldn't call it an aristocracy, because I think they're kind of a lack of aristocracy right now. But like that's who's really like in control of the narratives that are disseminated and then, you know, filter out to be voted on, quote unquote, by the democracy, right? So the entire system is an illusion. And, you know, democracy itself, I think, is an illusion. Democracy itself, I think, is a lie, you know, because like I said, every society is going to have a political class, going to have an aristocracy, going to have a hierarchy. And the same is true of a democracy. The only difference is in democracy, you're given the illusion of choice, right, by the people that, you know, like this, who control the institutions, who control the narratives. So I don't even know where I was going with that, but it's true.
I knew this I knew this was happening. I've actually had many conversations with Republican colleagues in the House of Representatives about what's happening on Fox with respect to Russia. But this was the first time I started feeling it from my own constituents who were watching this garbage.
So notice what you did not, let me turn this off. Okay, notice what you did not get from that segment, okay? So let's see what we learned from this CNN segment. Okay, we learned that questioning why we're such hard adversaries with Russia is a threat to democracy. Okay, we learned that asking basic questions about why exactly it should be our business to be the world police, you know, that's a threat to democracy. You can't say that. What we never actually got out of this was a reasoned defense of why exactly this should be our business, right? Why exactly should Ukraine be our business? You know, you never got that. All you got was basically a bunch of demagoguing, right? A bunch of hey, shut up, stop questioning, hey, threat to democracy, that, you never actually got a reasoned defense of why this should be our business, because there is no defense, right? There's literally no rational reason why this is our business, unless it is exactly the case that all you care about is stupid, pointless wars for neoliberalism. Even to an extent, a lot of liberals themselves in America, they still want to live the lie that, they still want to kind of LARP as the Vietnam War hippies, right? So even they can't fully come to grips with themselves that, like, actually what they're doing is just basically imperialism in the name of their ideology, which is what they're doing and which is what they stand for. And that's what they stand for deep down. But, even they can't really even get up there and just say, hey, we need to fight this war for our ideology. We need to fight this war for social leftism and neoliberalism. Like, they're not even honest with themselves enough to say that. So instead, all they're going to get up there and say is kind of just like reaction of, well, you're asking questions about why we hate Putin so much. You're talking remotely about the concept of a Russo-American alliance, or at least neutrality. Shut it down. We can't be hearing this. Don't say this. Okay, don't say this. Like, what did you actually get? Did you actually hear them say in that statement why? What was this guy's answer? What was his answer to the questions being asked by his constituents? He doesn't have one, right? All he has is kind of just the status quo, I guess you could say, thinking of the political establishment, the status quo thinking of DC, which is like, well, of course Putin is the bad guy, right? Of course Russia is the bad. And that's basically what it is. It's just basically what they're doing is like trying to just ridicule, use kind of your biases, right? Use kind of the narratives that you've been kind of fed over the past few years, and just kind of play off of those to kind of make this statement of like, well, of course that's bad, right? Kind of approaching it like it's already like this just commonly accepted truth, therefore no one can question it. But when you really get into this, there is no defense. Okay, there's really no like reason why this is our business. But obviously you're not going to get that answer. You're not going to get an answer here at all. Sam Madsen says the biggest reason we're seeing this switch is because the party's voters have changed. I mean, I think that's true to an extent. That's definitely true to an extent. The Democratic Party definitely is kind of the party of the kind of like the elitist class in America, right? Kind of upper middle class, DC, Nova type of people, New York City, urban liberals, Silicon Valley, whatnot. And I think you definitely see that. But like I said, I think it also has to do with the fact that you're now basically watching late stage liberalism take action, right? While it was the case, like in the 60s and stuff, that liberals didn't really have control of the institutions and they were just like getting off the ground. Of course, it was going to be the case that like, we're going to oppose war. We're going to oppose government, in terms of like the civil liberties and stuff. We're going to found the ACLU. We're going to be all about civil liberties. We're going to, we're gonna oppose sort of the status quo, whatever. But now liberals have become the status quo. Okay, so now what are you seeing right now? Now what you're seeing is basically, okay, before, we're not going to fight wars for anti-communism. We're not going to do that. But now that we have the power, now we are going to actively fight wars for liberalism, right? And that's what liberalism at its core is, or leftism and leftist ideology too, right? Like, they're not really the biggest nationalists. They don't believe in nation states. They don't really firmly believe in borders. And so, of course, to them, liberalism, leftism, Marxism, all the ideology is kind of at play here. These are all global ideologies. It's like Karl Marx didn't visualize nation states, right? Like the USSR or communist China. Karl Marx visualized in the end kind of a global, communist order, right? And I think liberals, largely speaking, think in similar ways, right? And so, like I said, that's what you're seeing now. Imperialism in the name of this ideology, right? As opposed to before, when they were basically just trying to get control of the system. And the same thing domestically, right? You're now obviously watching liberals liberals in control weaponize the national security state against conservatives, very actively against civil liberties and whatever it is, right? They have no regard for any of these things. They have no regard for free, remember the whole free speech line, they have no regard for any of that, right? because it was never about that, right? All of these lines were simply basically about gaining political control. And I think it's very important to take that into account. And so you can use it as kind of a gotcha. Hey, you're a liberal. Aren't you supposed to be anti-war? And, you might like confuse them a little bit, but ultimately, like in the grand scheme of things, in the end game, right? In the end game, the answer deep down is that no, they're not anti-war, right? They're anti-wars in the names of, anything that's not liberal. They're anti-war in the name of anti-communism or whatever it is, right? But like, when you really get down to it, what they want to see is the rest of the world spread around this, built around this ideology, right? This stuff spreads like a cancer. It spreads like a cancer in our society, and equally, it's going to spread like a cancer around the world, and that's why you see George Floyd murals in Kabul, Afghanistan, right? You see it there. But really, like I said, I think that's the main thing that you're seeing. It's not even like the party's voters changing. It's simply the fact that liberals now have control. And now what you're seeing is all these lines that you heard in the 1960s were against war, were for free speech, were for civil liberties. They never meant those things. It's not a matter of liberals have changed. What happened to liberals? These are the same people, same ideas. You're just watching them at, I guess, different stages of the plan, right? Different stages of their ideology. So, that's what you're seeing. Christopher says that CNN segment sounded like you're straight from Woodrow Wilson's playbook, the guy who started the fight to protect democracy BS. Yeah, it is exactly. It's very true. It did sound exactly like that. And like I said, this is what liberal imperialism is now the kind of, or just call it globalism. I guess you call it that too. Like that is the prominent ideology of the current liberal establishment, and that's definitely very true. Luis Jr. says liberals be like I hate imperialists and then proceeds to colonize non-liberal regions. Well, like we say, like we so often talk about, why did they hate imperialists so much? Did they hate imperialists simply because they were like people spreading their goals? No. They hated like old school imperialism because why? Because the kind of imperialists of old, right, were right-wing people ostensibly, right? They were monarchists. They were Christians, right? What did they often do when they imperialized? They made it a big thing and try to spread the gospel around the world, right? That was kind of part of the driving aspect of their imperialism. And also, they kind of did it to strengthen the kind of traditional European nation states, the traditional European societies, right? And that was the problem. Not that like, oh, self-determination, bro. No, they obviously don't believe in that, right? It was just simply the fact that the civilization they were spreading, was not liberal, right? It was kind of the opposite of liberal. And obviously, so now that you see liberals in not just control of America, in control of like the West in general, most like European countries, you look at Australia, you look at Canada, same story there, now that you're seeing liberal control of all of these things, I think you're really seeing how this is going. So, it's very true. It's very true. So anyways, let's look at some of the other articles around here, because these are all, a lot of these are kind of funny. So like I saw one, I don't know if it's here. Yeah, it's this one right here from Real Clear Politics. I haven't looked at this yet, but okay, here's from CNN's Matthew Chance. This is actually last year. So you can see this whole thing has been going on for a while, the whole Russia line. So from CNN's Matthew Chance, Tucker Carlson has become Russian state media's favorite pundit. Okay. And it's like, whatever. Like, honestly, that's whatever. But why exactly is it the case that, well, let me just say from our perspective, at least, I understand from their perspective, from CNN's perspective, from our perspective, I don't think there's anything noble about being, they say this guy works for the Kremlin. This guy is, liked by the Kremlin. Okay. Well, honestly, I don't think there's anything noble by being liked by the people in Washington, D.C. Okay. If you are the favorite pundit of the people in Washington, D.C., you're doing something wrong. Okay. As a matter of fact, you're probably doing something very evil. Okay. Nothing to be redeemed here. If you're the favorite social media influencer of Silicon Valley, that's not a brag. That's not a good thing. Okay, because I believe that the people of this country are like all evil or whatever. No, I don't believe that. But I certainly do believe that the establishment and that the institutions in charge of our country are rotten to the core, are crooked to the core. And so really, I don't see any virtue in like being, I don't know, American media's, Russian state media. What is the virtue in being American media's favorite pundit? What is it? There is none. And I don't know if it's the case that he is Russian state media's favorite pundit. I mean, I know that can be kind of slanderous or whatever. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that assessment's accurate. But like, even if it is, who cares? If anything, I think that's actually in a way more noble than being American media's favorite pundit, because, what is the utter state of American media? What is the utter state of Washington, D.C., of New York City, right? And who is American media, kind of bound to? Who do they represent? They don't represent the honest, hardworking people of this country, in any town, USA. It's D.C., it's Silicon Valley, and to an extent, it's Wall Street, right? And these are institutions that are crooked to their core, okay? There's nothing noble about this. There's nothing patriotic, I don't think, about being even liked by any of any of the kind of establishments in America. But anyways, let us continue reading here. So it says CNN's Matthew Chance looks at how Russian state TV is reacting to Fox News host Tucker Carlson's coverage of President Joe Biden and the buildup of Russian military along the Ukrainian border. And it's like, oh, here we go, I mean, I really think this, the same could be said about how other countries around the world that are not Russia, reacted to like Joe Biden's victory or whatever. It's just like, oh, but Russian media liked what you said, therefore bad. I don't know. Is his job for American media to like what you said? I mean, let's see. So there's that. Trying to see. There's some. I want to see if we can find some of the funnier pieces here, because these are all quite amusing. All right, here's one from the Daily Beast. Let's check this out. All right, I'm curious about this. So, the Daily Beast reports Kremlin TV worries Tucker Carlson's pro-Putin bias has gone too far. Wow. So they're saying that all right, let's see. Top Russian state propagandists are concerned that no one will take the Fox News host seriously anymore. Okay, because he's being too pro-Russia. Okay, interesting. Let's see. With Russian troops steadily massing on the Ukraine border and a looming threat of an invasion that the White House described as imminent. Ironic use of that word. We know what that word means in this community. It means it's never going to happen. So, Fox News host Tucker Carlson, would have you look the other way. Again, like it says, I mean, like I said, I'm not surprised by this, but you kind of see if you don't understand like the true goals behind these people, you don't understand what's truly going on, and you're looking at this from like a very dumbed down perspective. Let me talk like a normie for a second. Do you see the irony here, right? Do you see the irony here? You have the Daily Beast, one of the furthest left, like kind of news websites out there, is like talking bad about isolationism and being like anti-war and anti-engaging the U.S. in conflict. Like, would have you look the other way, as if that's such a bad thing that liberals have historically not said. Again, like I said, like we talked about earlier, we understand why that's the case, right? But looking at this from like a removed perspective, where we're just taking what liberals say at face value, why do you hippies literally all of a sudden now you're like, well, why are you looking the other way to this faraway conflict in a faraway land? But here we go. During this episode of his Monday show, Carlson pondered, why is it disloyal to side with Russia, but loyal to side with Ukraine? So true. 3 years earlier, Carlson admitted that he is rooting for Russia in its conflict with Ukraine. Very epic. He said in part, why do I care? What is going on in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia? And I'm serious. Why do I care? Why shouldn't I root for Russia, which I am? All right. It's a good question. Facing criticism, Carlson walked back his comments and claimed that he was joking. Okay. In 2022, he is unabashedly pushing the talking points favored by the Kremlin and no longer making excuses. Yeah, because again, right? There is something supposedly noble and virtuous by pushing the talking points favored by the U.S. State Department, by the Department of Defense, by the American news media, by the global liberal news media. There's something so virtuous about pushing those talking points. It is virtuous to push the talking points of DC and Silicon Valley or whatever. It's not virtuous to push the talking points of a Kremlin. Because why though? Because why? you know? I know some like right wingers are going to come along and say that, like, why are you talking so unpatriotically? But I think, let's think realistic here. Why is that such a bad thing? But anyways, Carlson is going so far to support the Russian propaganda narrative that prominent personalities on the Kremlin funded state television are concerned about his future in the United States. I'm concerned about his future. I'm concerned about all of our futures in the United States, because they think people, outlets like the Daily Beast and liberals in general, and the people who run the country in general, are literally talking about us like we're terrorists, and oftentimes are calling us terrorists. I'm concerned about our future. True. And then, I appreciate the support. I appreciate the support from the Kremlin, worried about my safety. I appreciate that they see what we see as well. That's epic, actually. Are we seeing the American conservative and the Russian conservative? Are we seeing the alliance here? Is the alliance beginning to form? Huh? Because they're helping us out. They're helping it out right now. You have the liberal media bringing us together. Because I look at this and I'm like, wait a minute. The Russian TV and the people in Russia are worried for our safety. I'm worried for my safety too. And it's like, and I think in many ways, for people who don't really get it and people are kind of conflicted, stuff like this is kind of almost like a coming together moment. It's like, hey, we might share more in common than we think we do. And maybe, like I said, maybe that's why the liberal establishment and the political class in America wants us to, doesn't want us to kind of know each other, right? Doesn't want us to know the truth about each other, wants us to be so opposed and to hate each other. Maybe because if we actually kind of took an honest look, there's a lot of conservatives in America that would look at like conservatism in Russia and conservatism in Hungary and in Poland or whatever, in a lot of parts of Eastern Europe, and say, hey, I kind of like what I see here, and they can't have that. They can't have that. But you look at something like this, I'm like, hey, I kind of agree with that, right? But okay, let's see. Last Sunday, one of Russia's most watched television networks, Channel 1, played the clip from Tucker Carlson's show where he argued that Russia's anger at NATO's alleged involvement in Ukraine was well justified. True. Reporter Ivan Blagoy, is that how you say it? Then noted that the Fox News host is predictably being accused of playing along with Moscow. They get it. They're just like us. they know what our media is like, just like us. Yo, the brotherhood's forming here, you guys. It's all coming together. My plan is all coming. The plan is all coming together. It's true. It's your trust the plan. It's happening. It's happening. They get us. They're just like us, you guys. They're just like us. Okay. Anyways, broadcasting the same translated clip of Carlson last week on Russia's second most watched TV network, Russia 1, host of 60 Minutes. I guess they have a show called 60 Minutes too. Hey. Interesting. Evgeny Popov fawned over Carlson by describing him as one of the voices of truth and reason. Oh, okay. So we got Russian TV saying Tucker Carlson is one of the voices of truth and reason, and complained that the host of the most watched show in all of cable news with millions of viewers is being silenced and marginalized. In 2020, Popov demonstrated his affinity for Carlson by introducing him as practically our co-host. It's very interesting stuff here, folks. What did I say? What did I say? The brotherhood is coming together. One struggle, my brothers. It is true. It is truly coming together here, folks. Okay. And like I said earlier, like I said at the beginning of the stream, you look at the fact, like I said, I don't think that Russian society is perfect. Russian society has a lot of problems. Their birth rate has a lot of problems. Abortion is a big problem there, and I think a lot of the kind of population of Russia is like in a bad state. But the Russian government, where they're trying to take the country, because keep in mind that we're talking about a country that dealt with like 100 years of Soviet rule, okay, and then you had Boris Yeltsin, who was a disaster. And when Putin took power, here's a country that was basically controlled by gangs and warlords. It was a mess. Yeltsin was trying to globalized, right? He's trying to basically hollow out the country to the neoliberal corporations. He was going to try to fix it that way. And here comes Putin. In comes Putin, a guy who says, we're not going to do it that way. We're not going to fix our country through the bad birth rate and the chaos in our country. We're not going to fix it through mass immigration and economic globalization. We're actually going to do the opposite of that, right? We're going to try to incentivize our people to have kids. We're going to implement a pro-family program, a pro-NATO program, right? That's going to incentivize the having of children. We're going to try to revitalize Christianity. We're not going to try to make society more secular or more liberal. We're going to try to revitalize Christianity. We're going to bring the Orthodox Church back into the fold of Russian politics, okay? And here's a guy who says, we're going to restrict immigration to our country. We're not going to just allow that. And we're actually going to kind of oppose sort of the global transnational corporations trying to move in, right? We're going to try to kind of protect our economy in kind of a nationalistic sense, okay? Now, let me say that really actually sounds a lot like kind of the message of Trump in 2016. I mean, does it not? And like I said, does that really sound so bad, right? I mean, it doesn't. And what you're seeing here, right? Look at this, like the kind of Russian state TV, like whatever, okay. But what are we kind of finding out? Are they big fans of like the kind of the mainstream GOP? Not really, but like us, like the right-wing populists, the nationalist people like Tucker Carlson, right? They actually, you see us kind of getting along here, right? And they're going to accuse it of being some type of collusion or whatever. It's like we're agents of the Russian government. That's not what it is. All that it is basically like a natural alliance, I would argue. And I would argue there is a natural alliance between like the American right, at least where the American right is going, like the modern American right, our American right, and sort of the Eastern European right, and they can really say whatever they want about it. They can call us all the names they want. But the reality of the situation is they fear it. And that's what it really is, right? A big reason why they freak out over this, and the big reason why they freaked out when Tucker went to Hungary and whatever, right, is because they fear the idea of the American right kind of looking at Eastern Europe. Because you look at Eastern Europe, like I said, here are countries who actually are coming back, right, are building up their success as we speak, and they're doing it without globalism and neoliberalism. They're doing it by promoting they're trying to get their own birth rate up instead of just trying to saying we're going to solve the problem with mass immigration, right? They're trying to kind of have their own national economies here and not just be based on free trade and global trade, whatever, right? They're basically doing the opposite of everything our political class has done the past 40 years. But you're seeing, it's kind of working. These countries are coming back, right? They're slowly but surely getting there, right? People talk about how poor, like a country like, oh, Hungary is so poor. Look at the GDP growth. And it's like, number one, I don't think GDP growth, first and foremost, is like the number one measure of like what a strong society is. Hold on, we got a super chat here. Let's see. Where's the super chat? Let me find it. Oh, I guess there's no chat, but he just sends $5 from Ray. Thank you very much, Ray. We appreciate that. But as I was saying, you're seeing what you're kind of seeing in Eastern Europe is success stories of more or less our ideology. They're not the exact same, but it's the success of ideas very similar to kind of the national conservative, national populist movement in America, right? And they don't want you to see that, right? The political class, right? The Daily Beast, whatever, they absolutely. You look, I guess, let's do it this way. The Daily Beast is a liberal publication. CNN is a liberal outlet. What do the liberals fear the most, right? You can very clearly see from an article like this who they want conservatives to be, right? They want the American right. They want American conservatives to keep thinking like the neocons, right? They want us to be like the George Bush interventionists that I guess the movement kind of was when I was younger, right? When I was like a little kid and stuff. And it's just if you ever needed like a vindication of what we are, and that what we believe is correct, look at how our opponents react to it. Our opponents, as you can clearly see, want us to be the Bushites, right? They want us to be the kind of foreign interventionist, global conservatives, right? Based on an ideology based on, free trade, globalization, mass immigration, mass intervention around the world, the globalist American empire. You can very clearly see it. That's what they want conservatives to be. Now, we obviously know that the Daily Beast and people like CNN are not on our side. So I think it's the natural end, like it's the natural solution here, that it's very obvious in the grand scheme of things, what we're doing is right. What we're doing is winning. And that's precisely why they're slandering it so hard, right? And, and that's precisely why when we kind of look to countries who are kind of doing more or less to an extent, like what we kind of want to see similar in our own country, maybe not the same, but similar in our country, right? We see the slander, we see the utter, the stuff like this. Well, how'd you look the other way? Threat to democracy, whatever it is. So anyways, let's continue here. Last Wednesday, Russia's English language state media outlet RT published an op-ed by Irish commentator Graham Dockery, who marveled, once considered a sewer pipe of neoconservative jingoism, Fox News is now anti-war, or at least its top-rated host is. The picture is clear. When it comes to Ukraine, pundits and commentators from the establishment left to the neocon right only disagree on how quickly and strongly the U.S. should wade in to stop a potential invasion of Ukraine. Only Carlson, considered far right by American liberals, is in complete opposition to U.S. involvement. And it's like, again, doesn't that kind of tell you we're on the right side here? If the establishment left are the ones who are siding with the neocons here, and it's like, we don't like the establishment left, do we? I don't think any of us do. I think in the way we should see this as a vindication. We see this as a vindication that, we're in the right direction, right? Like, because do I really care what Russian media thinks of us? No, I don't. I appreciate the kind words, but do I really care what Russian media? No, I don't care. I don't actively care what they think about us, but I think it's a good indicator how much liberal media, right, our opponents in this country dislike what we're saying. I do always think that that's definitely a good indicator, and you're definitely seeing that here. So RT's writer complained that the sole anti-war voice on primetime cable happens to belong to the man who liberals believe is a white supremacist, thus undermining his considerable influence. He gets it. He even gets the way liberals use terms like white supremacist. I'm telling you. All right. I'm not actively calling it for it. I'm just saying I think what you're going to see here as a result of all this is sort of a natural brotherhood to, a natural alliance to form here, Like remember how in 2019 or whatever, a lot of the American conservatives were kind of saw this natural friendship between us and the Hong Kong protesters. I'm talking about something in that sense. I kind of on our side of things, I wouldn't be surprised if this is kind of what you see between us and the Russian right, and the Eastern European right in general, because I think, you're look at this stuff, guys. I agree more with state-run Russian media than the Daily Beast on this stuff. And I'm not afraid to say that. You can call me anti-American, whatever it is, but it's very true. And what Tucker is saying is very true. So we continue. That same day, opposing U.S. intervention against Russia's aggression, Carlson prodded his audiences by claiming, "You are currently funding a proxy battle in Ukraine against the nuclear-armed Russian military, and that could very well erupt in a hot war that includes you, the United States." So true. So true. Same point I made in my video on Monday, but we continue. The tactic of terrorizing American audiences with the possibility of nuclear war in order to undermine U.S. support for Ukraine has repeatedly been discussed by experts on Russian state television. Look, again, like I said, I'm not trying to say the liberal hypocrisy line here, but you do. It is humorous to point out the irony or the 180, which we understand why that is, but Here are the people who, for decades, and they are the same people. The American left has not changed. Same people, same ideas. Obviously out for decades. They were the ones who were terrorizing American audiences with the possibility of nuclear war, right? They've always been the denuclearization people, the make love not war people, right? And now it's you're the one fear mongering about war. Like I said, we understand why this is. I'm not pretending to be confused by that, but So we continue. In order to undermine U.S. support for Ukraine has repeatedly been discussed by experts on Russian state television, portraying Ukraine as an insignificant country of no importance to the United States, unworthy of such an alleged risk. Carlson derided it as a small, corrupt nation. Very true. So true. So true. Why are they saying this like it's such a bad thing, But no, that's what you gotta, for the Ukraine. It's very funny because it's true too. Ukraine is a very corrupt country, but it's just no, Ukraine is the beacon of democracy. I mean, they're literally like America 2.0 here, and we must defend them at all costs against big, bad, evil post-Soviet Russia, right? On Thursday, Carlson reiterated the same slight and described Ukraine, the largest state entirely within Europe and the second largest on the continent after Russia, as a pretty small country. In comparison to the United States, I mean, yeah, it is. And it's not a country with a particular amount of landmass, I don't think. But let's see. He added, not of population, I meant to say. He in like population centers, right? He added, Vladimir Putin is our most dangerous enemy, they scream. We can't let him hurt Ukraine. So it turns out that Russiagate was actually more effective even than we'd realize. And by the way, I think, speaking about the Russiagate stuff, speaking about the Russian collusion line, I don't think it's a coincidence, right? You saw in 2016, one of the big controversial questions, if you'll remember, that Trump on that campaign raised was precisely, why is Russia our enemy like this? Like, shouldn't we have positive relations with them? He was very slandered for that, both by Hillary Clinton and the Democrats, but also a lot of people in the Republican field for this stance, Now, Trump gets into office and, initially Putin and Trump are kind of friendly with each other. You kind of see, maybe, like I said, the kind of Russo-American alliance, or at least peace, right? At least, world scale neutrality is kind of going to take shape here. And then what do? They make this whole big scandal about Russia. Trump, for political purposes, basically has to distance himself away from that sort of 2016 talking point about, about maybe a Russo-American alliance kind of forming here. And so instead, now it's like, I'm tougher on Russia than anyone. It's like, look at me, I'm going to fund the Ukrainian rebels or whatever, And like, I understand why Trump kind of felt suckered to do that. I'm not saying it's right or whatever, but that whole, I think part of the point of this Russian collusion thing was precisely to really, paint Russia in the eyes of the American public like as this big bad enemy. If you'll remember back in like 2015, 2016, it wasn't just the belief of Trump. It was sort of like the average belief of like a lot of ordinary people, kind of like the populist take here. Not the belief, obviously, of anyone in DC, but kind of the ordinary American. A lot of ordinary Americans kind of asked this question, like, why is Russia such this like big bad enemy? Shouldn't we have like peaceful relations with Russia? Why do things have to be so hostile? It's not the Soviet Union anymore. Didn't we just do the Winter Olympics in Russia? I remember, and you'll probably remember too, this is something a lot of people ask themselves. Nobody asks themselves in the general public this anymore, with the exception of like us, because, Russia has been so effectively demonized through like cultural propaganda, political propaganda, media propaganda throughout that whole Russiagate thing, the whole Russian collusion thing, that it's like, now we shall not speak of the name of the Russian government. We shall not speak Vladimir Putin's name. But let us go back and remember that it was not always like this, right? Literally before that, back like 2014, 2015, 2016, this was something, this was a mainstream opinion that a lot of ordinary Americans did hold, But anyways, continuing here, the Steele dossier has been debunked, which is true. But in Washington, the theme remains in force. Russia, Russia, Russia. Russia is bad. What is this about exactly? Well, it's obviously the usual collection of children falling for the usual collection of lies, but why this specific lie? Why this specific lie? A good question that Tucker poses. And again, I will say, I think it is this specific lie. It is Russia they target specifically, precisely because, like I said, Vladimir Putin as president, as like the governor of Russia, has done all the things opposite of what sort of the globalist liberal order wants, right? They want open borders, they want mass immigration, they want refugee resettlement. Putin says no. They want globalization, they want to move all these transnational corporations into Russia. Putin says no. They want to move all the global banks into Russia. Putin says no. We're going to like kind of keep his nationalist policy when it comes to our own Russian banks, right? They want to eliminate Christianity and label the Bible hate speech across the world and secularize the world. Putin says, no, I'm going to prop up the Orthodox Church in my country. I'm going to make sure people know that the church, the like kind of national church of my country is in control here and they have the power here and like, you're not going anywhere. They want to spread feminism. Putin says, no, marriage between a man and a woman. We want traditional families. We want kids. We want our people to be married and having children. They want to stop Western population growth. And like I said, they want to kind of subsidize that population growth with mass immigration. Putin says, no, I'm going to fix my birth rate. We're not going to just try to like arbitrarily solve this problem through immigration. We're going to try to like promote pronatal policy. We're going to try to encourage our people to have kids. Same thing in Hungary, same thing in Poland, right? And this is why I think precisely like Tucker says, why this specific lie? I think that's it. That's the reason why it is this specific lie. It is because, and a lot of conservatives don't realize this yet, I think they will eventually, those sort of Eastern European governments are doing the exact opposite of what like the liberal establishment wants in America. And that's precisely why you get this specific lie, right? That's precisely why Viktor Orban, Vladimir Putin, the guy who runs Poland, I forgot his name, these are like the evil people. These people cannot let this happen, And you cannot let these people be promoted. These are dictators. These are corrupt countries. Look at their GDP growth, right? That's the reason why. And you really can't convince me otherwise. I think it's very obvious this is the reason why they're so anti-Eastern Europe, right? But they want these countries to look like Ukraine or the Czech Republic or whatever, where the countries that kind of did the opposite of that. They want Eastern Europe to do what Western Europe did. They want them to globalize like Germany and England and whatnot. And Eastern Europe is saying no, So he later added, you still have to wonder, invasion or not, why is this any profound concern of ours? Why would you even consider risking American lives or sending billions of dollars to stop it? So true. So true. Predictably, Carlson's portrayal of Ukraine as a small, insignificant nation that is of no consequence to the U.S. By the way, that's how Vietnam was portrayed during that whole thing by the hippies. But anyways, we continue. Is in perfect alignment with the way Russia's beleaguered neighbor is being smeared. It's like the daily. Since when do the progressive leftists just totally show for the U.S. State Department? Well, that's what happens when they control the U.S. State Department. But we continue. It's being smeared on Kremlin-funded state television in order to humiliate the fledgling democracy. Okay, yeah, is that what Ukraine is? Is that what Ukraine is? It's the beacon of democracy. It's the best. Yeah, okay. It's actually an extremely corrupt country. Okay, people don't know this. It's not really the shining example of democracy, is it? Or maybe it is a shining example of democracy, I should say, because that's the truth of democracy, and I think the same is true of America. But and dissuade it from resisting Russian aggression. Imagine for a second, if you want to see just like how actually closely aligned the liberal establishment and the conservative, aka the neoconservative establishment is. Ask yourself a question. We've been reading this article for a while now. If I told you that John Bolton or like Bill Kristol or, some other like neoconservative thinker, Irving Kristol, whoever, if I told you one of those people wrote this article, would you believe it? Like the rhetoric we've been hearing, like this literally reads exactly like something you see from like John Bolton, right? If he were to write an op-ed in the New York Times, like this is like this basic, like word for word. I haven't even gotten really a sense of like a left-winger is writing this article at all. If you brought this article to me and didn't show me who wrote it, didn't show me the outlet, and told me that some DC neocon guy wrote this, I would believe it in an instant. Because it just sounds like it sounds exactly like it. Like it's not even like there's not even like a distinction where you kind of hear a difference in like the liberal and neocon rhetoric here. Like it's the exact same. This could literally like beleaguered neighbor, fledgling democracy, Russian aggression. Like this reads exactly like the war hawks of the GOP, quote unquote, would write it, it's just an interesting thing to see because this is the Daily Beast we're talking about. This is like a pretty far left kind of like progressive news website. They're speaking the exact same as the DC neocons. So it really tells you who's all in bed with each other. It really tells you like, it really tells you who the real conservatives are, right? And tells you that that's us because our sort of establishment, our sort of like people in charge in our movement, they sound exactly like the Daily Beast on this topic. So, even if you told me some generic, you told me Liz Cheney wrote this op-ed, I would believe you. And I would read through this. I wouldn't even see like a second where I think to myself, are you sure this sounds like something a left? That's the exact same. Like it is like word for word, basically the exact same thing you'd see. So anyways, this Tuesday 60 Minutes broadcast string of translated clips from Carlson's show on Fox News. Host Popov added, indeed, I can imagine a cattle rancher in Montana. What does he care about Ukraine's territorial sovereignty? I like this. I like this guy a lot. I don't even, I don't know what he believes on other issues, but from what I'm hearing, he's pretty based, actually. That's actually very true. What does your average cattle rancher in Montana think? But you see the framing here, right? Because pretending this article is written to conservatives for a second, which it's not, but pretending it is, what are they trying to do here, right? What they're trying to do here, these are very reasonable takes. These are things that like we believe, but they're trying to say, hey, this is what the Russian government believes. And they're trying to kind of get to that reactionary, average boomer conservative mind who's largely speaking still stuck in the Cold War and still stuck on like daytime Fox News propaganda to think that Putin is like this evil autocrat, still stuck on the State Department Kool-Aid and stuff, right? They're basically trying to strike at that mind and say, well, I'm a real American patriot, and I don't really see why a rancher in Montana cares either. But if this is what those Russian communists are saying, then, I think maybe this is not what I should believe. Like, this is what the Russian commies want. Well, I don't want to be a Russian commie. I don't know if this is such a good idea now. I don't know if Tucker is saying such good things now, but it's not going to work. Like, we're not going to fall for this anymore, okay? Because someone's going to read this without the whole like anti-Russia propaganda kind of built into their system. Some conservative is going to look at these statements and these words and say, maybe you're right. Maybe they're right, actually. I think I agree with that, right? Like, there's going to be enough people out there who look at this out and it kind of breaks their conditioning. And they're not going to say, well, Putin wants that. Well, I don't want what Putin wants. I ain't no commie. For as many people as that, you're probably going to get more people who say, well, wait a minute. I think that kind of makes sense to me, So let's hope. Let's hope that actually something like this is kind of a red pill. But okay, the same goes for these 320 million Americans. The rest might actually be able to find Ukraine on a map, which is 13 million. Popov dismissed the entire population of the United States as being uneducated or indifferent to the fate of Ukraine, or both. Is that not the case? I mean, if I went to a college campus tomorrow and asked college kids to find Ukraine on a map, do you think they would be able to do it? Maybe we should do that, because I was trying to do I want to do a street video this week. I wasn't sure what we should do. Like, I was thinking of doing something like, what is a woman, right? Kind of play off that whole Matt Walsh thing. I guess you could ask them that. Or I was going to ask them, like, do you think we should intervene in Ukraine? And then tell them, well, look at what Putin believes in LGBT, and try to see if they change their stance, to try to kind of expose the kind of global agenda of liberalism. But I think also, honestly, kind of the whole, can you find Ukraine on a map? That might be kind of a tongue-in-cheek to do too. I don't know. Maybe we should do that. But let's see. Proving the Russian propagandists at least partially correct. Proving the Russian propagandists at least partially correct. Okay. On Monday, New Jersey Congressman Tom Malinowski wrote on Twitter, "My office is now getting..." Yeah. So remember, we watched this on the CNN thing. The whole. So yeah, of course. And this is the worst. What? We don't want war with you. War in Ukraine, bro. That's crazy. Threat to democracy, right? Okay. Last summer, Carlson complained about allegedly being targeted by the NSA for surveillance. True. As a consequence of his dealings with U.S.-based Kremlin intermediaries in his attempt to secure an interview with Russian President Vladimir Putin. That would be so epic. We're still waiting. People ask me, Vince, where's the Putin video? Yeah, where's the Putin interview, Tucker? Okay, where's the Putin? Where are you going to post a Putin video? Where's the Putin interview? All right, I'm gonna deny answering the question, and I'm just gonna turn it back on its head and say, where's the Putin interview? Huh? Why don't you go ask Tucker that? Go ask Tucker where the Putin interview is. Okay, stop asking me where the Putin video is. All right, and look. We did a Putin video, not the Putin video. We did a Putin video on Monday. And obviously right now we're doing a Putin live stream for like an hour. Okay. So, cut me some slack here. Okay. You're getting the content regardless. All right. All right. And where is the Putin video? I cannot disclose that. That is top secret information, but I assure you, you will get it when the time is right. It is true. Last summer, Carlson, okay. The NSA dismissed, let's see. So, okay, let's finish up the article here, folks. U.S. State Department's we spent this whole stream saying, talking about the shilling of State Department propaganda. And who do they cite? U.S. Department of State's Global Engagement Center. So, okay, but anyways, U.S. Department, again, we've talked about stop shilling for State Department propaganda. What do we get? U.S. Department of State's Global Engagement Center described RT and its sister network Sputnik as critical elements in Russia's disinformation and propaganda ecosystem. Really? Really. Now, again, going back to this whole kind of natural brotherhood talking point, critical elements in Russia's disinformation and propaganda ecosystem coming from basically a U.S. intelligence agency. Where have I heard that one before? Huh? Where have I heard those words before? Where have I heard disinformation and propaganda before, huh? Isn't that what they call us? Aren't those like the same exact rhetoric that the same exact people use against us? You know? And so it's like, if you're trying, I don't know if this is going to be effective, what they're doing here, because it's like, if you're trying to keep the American right and the Russian right away from one another, and you don't want the American right to kind of go down that rabbit hole of saying, hey, Eastern Europe kind of has an idea what's going on here. Okay, I don't know if the way to do it is to like basically use the same rhetoric you do of Russia towards America. Because for it is true, a lot of like normie conservatives, a lot of Fox News viewers will just buy the State Department propaganda like that. But I think there's also a lot of people who honestly look at this and say, all the things you've heard and the way you've heard them talk about, you know, the Russian media and whatnot, as you know, we kind of look at that and we're like, hey, they talk about authentic conservative media in America like the exact same way, like same exact words. They talk about us on social media and just in general, like they use the same exact rhetoric here. So what's going on here? I don't know if I'm going to buy it. And I hope a lot of people look at this and are like, you know, I'm not automatically saying that makes Russia like our friend, but it is kind of interesting that they're talking about the Russian government and the Russian media in the same way they talk about American conservatives and like populist right-wing pro-Trump conservatives. Maybe I should look into this, you know. Like I said, I think when you look into it, you realize that there's a lot of lying that goes on from the State Department, from the liberal class and whatever when in regards to Russia. And, you know, I think you see where it comes from, right? And you see that maybe we have something in common. I don't know, you know, I don't know. 2016 Trump brought it up. Tucker Carlson kind of mildly's been bringing it up a little bit. I don't know. Just the thought, you know, just the thought. Maybe the Eastern European right-wing governments are not like the worst thing to ever exist. Maybe in some ways they're actually preferable to the, you know, rainbow flag liberal democracy we have in America. I don't know. Just some thoughts. All right, just some food for thought. Okay. You know, maybe there is something that the American right can learn from these places. But they don't want, they don't want you to have that dialogue. They don't want you to have that relationship, because if the American right took a little bit of a look at places like Poland, Hungary, Russia, you know, they've kind of realized ways in which we could actually be kind of an effective political faction in America. And that's not what they want. And like, I don't think these countries are perfect by any stretch. I'm not like a shill for everything they do, but it's like there are honest, genuine things that I think we can learn from what conservatives in Eastern European countries, the way they kind of wield power, use political power, attain it, and what they kind of do in terms of policy. You know, is that a thought? Okay, can some of the based American patriots and watching this, can we at least kind of like give that some thought? Okay, that's all I'm asking. Give it some thought. Maybe consider the fact that, you know, the propaganda of the U.S. State Department isn't really on your side here. You know, maybe consider that. Maybe consider that the woke institutions, are not really telling you the truth about this. Like, can we just consider that as a possibility? Okay, I would hope that's the case. All right. So anyways, one of their aims is to promote the idea that the United States should withdraw from its global leadership position. Sounds like us. Hey, that sounds a lot like Donald Trump. That sounds a lot like that sounds a lot like Pat Buchanan. That sounds a lot like what we believe. It's just like, dude, you're trying to like discourage us from like, you know, kind of having sympathies with like the Russian right. This is not a good way to do it. It's really not. Because I'm looking at everything you're saying here, and I'm looking like, number one, hey, we kind of have the same struggle. They say the same things as we do. And in many ways, they have a lot of the same beliefs that we do. So I don't know how effective this really is, which would enable Russia to pursue its expansionist goals unabated. Yeah. Well, you know who I don't want to expand their expansionist goals unabated? This regime, this government in power, okay? No, I don't want, for the sake of the rest of the world, because, I know I'm an isolationist. I to an extent, I do care. Okay. I have sympathy for people in the other realms of the world. And that's precisely a very large reason why I would prefer that they not fall victim to the same, false religion of globalism, of global liberalism that we are subjected to, right? Like I genuinely feel bad for a lot of these people in other countries that have to be fed this American liberal imperialism. Like honestly, you ask me, any country I think should withdraw its global leadership position, I would say the globalist American empire. I mean, that's what I would really say, and I think this is an important thing to point out to a lot of the kind of people on the right, the conservatives who do think this war is our business. I notice a lot of these people, a lot of the Republicans, right? The Republicans who are pro-intervention in Ukraine, they seem to think that it's like, well, first of all, they kind of believe the whole State Department slander that like Russia is like Nazi Germany or something. It's like this crazy communist dictatorship, fascist, whatever, right? Like all the words in one. Okay. But I think that's something else important to understand here is that when the American military and when the American government, when the American regime intervenes abroad, and I pay attention because I want conservatives to understand this. I want right-wingers to understand this, okay? When we intervene abroad, okay, it is not like us that is intervening. It is whoever is basically in control of the United States government, okay? And so when the United States government, when the American regime intervenes abroad, okay, whether that's Afghanistan or Iraq or Ukraine or Taiwan or wherever else they want to do it, they are not spreading, Christian morality, traditional values, and like freedom and liberty or whatever. Like that's not what's going on here, okay? The U.S. military, like I get it. We love the troops, courtesy of the red, white, and blue American soldier, all those music and stuff, but I think it's relevant to also ask, they are employees of the government. They do the bidding of the government. They do the bidding of the regime in power. Who is that government? Who is that regime in power, right? And so I think it's important to understand that when we intervene abroad, we're not doing it in the name of the American flag or whatever. As much as maybe you would like that, as much as that's your ideal, that's what all these American soldiers, in the word of Toby Keith, are doing across, that's not what it is, because it is not us that's intervening abroad. It is the U.S. government that is intervening abroad. And it's interesting because a lot of conservatives will say things like, well, the U.S. government is tyrannical. I'm tired of this tyranny. It's like, so you believe that like the U.S. government is like this tyrannical, evil, communist, left-wing, liberal, autocracy, fascist government. Like, they just throw all the words together. So you believe that about the U.S. government. Okay. And by the way, I kind of believe that too, to an extent. But like, this is what you believe about the U.S. government. Like it's like this evil communist regime or whatever. But you simultaneously believe that when that evil, tyrannical U.S. government intervenes abroad, suddenly now all of a sudden they're spreading your values, right? Suddenly it's like here in America, they're communists. But when the communists who run that government intervene abroad, suddenly they're spreading the old republic. They're spreading the bald eagle and the American flag and one nation under God. It's like that's not how it works. They're not spreading faith, family, and freedom. Like that's not what they're doing. Okay. So this is all to say that you can't, when we got out here as America First people, as like the nationalists, as the isolationists, when we get out here and say we cannot be intervening in other countries until we fix our own country, I don't think that's just rhetoric at all. Like people say, well, that's a false dichotomy, right? They say that's a logical fallacy. You absolutely can kill two birds with one stone. You can't though. You can't, because so long as we are not in control of this U.S. government, and I'm not even saying that intervention in general is good, but even if we're under we cannot be under the notion that we're intervening in the name of our values, of American values. We can't even like pretend to be doing that so long as the American government doesn't share our values. Like, you see how that works, right? Because we can say all we want, that we need to get in there and stop the Russian communists and, spread the American flag and the bald eagle and hamburgers and hot dogs and the old republic and the founding fathers. We need to be defending that in Ukraine. You can say that all you want, But understanding that's not what the U.S. government stands for, understanding that the American regime does not stand for that, and you say that yourself, right? You, the average like boomer Republican or whatever, you yourself will get out here and say our government are full of tyrannical people. These are communists running our country. Okay, well, what do you think happens when the communists running your country intervene abroad? Do you think they're suddenly like just spreading American values? No, they're not. And so, no, it's not a logical fallacy at all to say we have to fix our own country before we can even talk about what we're doing in the rest of the world, because so long as we do not fix our own country, whatever we're doing in the rest of the world is in the name of the communist tyrants that you hate so much, right? Is in the name of global liberalism. It is in the name of the kind of secular religion of globalism. Like that's what anywhere the U.S. intervenes around the world, that's what you're fighting for. Okay, you will be fighting for the LGBT flag. You'll be fighting for Pride Month. You'll be fighting for BLM. You'll be fighting for feminism. You'll be fighting for liberalism. And you cannot change these things until you change the people who are in power in this country. Okay. So with that said, I don't think no like conservative person, no Republican person should even entertain the idea, even if they like personally think, I kind of wish we would go spread our faith, family, and freedom overseas. I disagree, but at least that's your perspective. Even if that's your perspective, you cannot get that done under this regime. You cannot get that done under this government, because this government does not stand for those things. And so even if you go somewhere else around the world and like try to do that, you're not going to get the result you want. You're not going to get it. You're going to, like I said, you're going to get feminism or whatever, because that's what the people in power in this country stand for. Okay. So that's what I wanted to kind of close with on this topic, but let us kind of just finish out this article here. Okay. All right, let's finish here. Carlson's talking points appear to be fully aligned with the Kremlin's pursuits. Interesting. Man, maybe this Kremlin ain't so bad. It's like, do you want me to look at this and say, well, I don't know if I really agree with Tucker so much. No, Tucker's too based. We love Tucker too much for that to be the case. Okay, so it literally cannot be the case that Tucker Carlson is wrong. It has to be the case that maybe the Kremlin is getting something right. Maybe those big, bad, evil Soviets, because this is 1991, as we all know, maybe these big, bad evils, maybe they got the right idea. Maybe they got the right idea, which is why they are frequently praised by the Russian state media. Okay, earlier in January, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, I don't even know how to say that name. I've been getting some of these Russian pronunciations good so far. I don't have that one, okay? Asserted that Russia can't afford to lose the information war against the West. They can't afford to lose the culture war against the Western liberals? That's kind of a base take, to be honest. One struggle. It's not my brothers, right? So who would it be? It'd be one struggle, my comrades. True. One struggle, comrades. Against the West, it certainly doesn't hurt to have a major media personality broadcasting propaganda that benefits Moscow directly to millions of Americans. It's kind of epic. I'd actually much rather have a major media personality broadcast propaganda that benefits Moscow to Americans than a major media personality broadcasting propaganda that benefits Washington, D.C. or Silicon Valley, Los Angeles. Okay, I'd actually much rather have that. I would rather have Moscow benefit than any of the benefit of the evil scum that runs this country. I mean, quite frankly, it's like should we really be like that? Should we really see what propaganda that benefits Washington, D.C. is such a good thing? Like, I don't think we should. But to finish out the article here, folks, Russian independent television channel, Dozid, all right, it's Dozid, also known as TV Rain, noted Carlson's bizarre fealty to the Kremlin. On Tuesday, host, I'm getting sick of these Russian names, Ekaterina Kazachkri, okay, Kachurkatsi, okay, pointed out Tucker Carlson is one of the brightest personalities of the American conservative television channel Fox News. Well, I've kind of always believed that personally, independently of myself. If all these Russian TV people are one struggle, comrades, I think you're seeing it. I think This is just one big case for the Russo-American alliance when we take power. Like obviously Russia's not going to ally with the current American like liberal regime, but it's like I don't know. When we take power, like I think this is this article right here, one of the biggest cases you could get for us to like be friendly with them that you could ever get when we take power again. I mean, people talk about a Russian-American alliance. Between, obviously it'd be kind of more of a right-wing conservative one. And this article is really making a strong case for that. They don't realize it. They don't think so, but they are. Sometimes it seems he attends advanced training courses at the Russian Foreign Ministry. Okay. So, there you have this. All right. Again, we know the story here, but again, let me close out the we'll do Q&A in a second. Let me close out this portion of the stream by, once again reiterating, I think it's time that the kind of average conservative ask the questions, right? Because I get it. We're supposed to hate Russia. All right. Every like conservative, like mainstream, like think tank or whatever is still very anti-Putin. All right. Whatever it is. I get it. Okay. I used to be in the same boat. I used to be in the same camp. But like I said, you look at the way they're responding to Tucker asking very like basic surface level questions about Russia. And you look at the fact that you look at kind of the struggle, what Russian conservative media is saying versus what American liberal media is saying, and ask yourself who you really share more in common with. All I'm saying is that, like I said, maybe there is a reason why you are taught so much by the political establishment. The same political establishment, let me remind you, that has destroyed our country. The same political establishment that is using the national security state against you. The same political establishment that took down Donald Trump and did everything they could to stop your guy, our guy, from getting into power. Maybe it's just time to perhaps ask the question, maybe it's remotely possible that these like neoliberal globalist people in power that don't like us and we're opposed to, maybe they're not telling the full truth when it comes to Russia. Like, can we admit that to be a possibility? Many people will not, because don't get me wrong, I still get a lot of like other right-wingers, other Republicans and stuff, who really don't like the Russia thing. They really don't like my kind of like natural, I don't know if, like I said, the Russo-American alliance, like you kind of see it going on here, right? They don't like when I bring up these talking points. They whenever I point out things that Putin does that are like kind of what we want to do, right? We oppose vaccine mandates. We're against cancel culture. We're against wokeism. We're against pornography. We're for Christianity. We're for Christian influence in politics. We're for families. We're for people having kids. We're against the big tech companies of Silicon Valley. Wait a minute. Putin is kind of talking and doing stuff about all these things, right? The second I kind of like bring any of this up, you still do get oftentimes that whole reaction of like autocrat, dictator, no, tyrant, he's a commie, like all of that kind of like talking points. And all I'm saying, okay, just some food for thought. All I'm saying, can I at least get from some of you who are skeptics, at least think about it a little bit, okay? Okay, can we get that? All right. And let me again say, if you're so anti-China, maybe rifting away Russia from China wouldn't be the worst idea. I mean, I think Russia and China are not really as natural allies as I think people kind of assume that they are. These are two countries, even when they were both controlled by like communist dictatorships, these are two countries even then who didn't get along that well. Okay, so kind of in terms of like, I don't know, the ethnic or nationality based rivalry, they don't really like each other. Let me say that first. But let me also really say, right, that the Russian government is not as similar to the Chinese government as they're both commie governments, bro. It's not really the case, right? It's more of like it's more of a rival, an alliance out of practicality. And also, it's no coincidence that Russia has grown closer to China as the United States has like further and further outcasted them out of the picture. Okay, so just some things to take into consideration, right? So again, if you're like so anti-China, if you're a big deal about this anti-China stuff, why would you not see it maybe being the case that like shouldn't kind of we try to rift Russia away from China, bring them a little bit closer to us? Is that logical? Does that make sense? Trump talked about that in 2016, but because of Russiagate has conditioned your mind now, it's like we can't even like discuss the possibility of that. Can we consider that? Can we consider maybe it's the case that the reason why the neoliberal, neoconservative establishment, who, let us reiterate, hates you, does not like you, and you don't like them either, can we maybe consider the fact that maybe their propaganda, maybe their talking point, maybe their party line on the topic of Russia and Vladimir Putin, maybe it's not the party line that you should be towing, right? Can we kind of consider that? So just some things to consider. All right, just some things to consider. So let's see. Daniel Chang says Mr. Z is correct about U.S. and Russia. Oh yeah, I absolutely agree. He has a great video on that. Is the Russo-American alliance inevitable? And yeah, that's my take as well. It's not to say it's guaranteed to happen, and I don't think it will happen so long as we're not in power. But I think, look, in the ideal world, in a country where the United States ourselves is not so secularized, in a state where religion does influence politics like it used to for like most of American history, in an ideal world where America actually is a Christian society and a traditionalist society too, perhaps, by the way, just as we kind of did with the Russian Tsar originally, perhaps we would see the Russians as, a fellow kind of Christian Western people, right? And perhaps it would be kind of epic because we know China, they're not, I wouldn't say they're like communist, right? But like China is a country where state atheism is strictly enforced, right? They persecute religion in general. They're now starting to like really come after Christianity, right? They persecute Christians. They're kind of like a left. I don't know if like left wing in the American sense, but they're kind of like a left leaning kind of atheistic state in that sense, right? Wouldn't it be epic? Wouldn't it be based in epic for like the alliance of Christian Western society between America and the United States, to team up against the atheist Chinese commies, if you want to like see them as that, like that's kind of the ideal way I see this, if I'm being totally honest with you. Wouldn't that be epic? Doesn't it actually sound like a half decent idea? I think it does. I don't know, maybe that's just me, but of course that's never going to happen because the kind of the Russian government, the kind of the Russian regime, I guess you could say, and the American regime don't share that, right? Whereas Putin is kind of trying to like lean more towards sort of like a traditional Russia, right? Like pre-Soviet Russia. He kind of leans into that a little bit. The one where the Orthodox Christianity is very influential, right? Kind of the old school kind of westernized aristocracy, kind of right-wing aristocracy game they had going on before. Like Putin's trying to lean into that, whereas Putin is trying to kind of lean into that like kind of traditional Russian society and do that. We're doing the opposite. We move away as far as we can from like our old republic, right? Our traditional society. And so of course, so long as our government and their government, our leadership and their leadership are at odds with one another, this will never happen. But like we don't like our current, don't like our current leadership. We don't like the current government, do we? So, I think understanding though that, we can't see it through the lens of this. I think, the Russo-American alliance, it does make sense for many reasons, practical reasons, I'd argue moral reasons and ideological reasons as well. But I digress. Okay. Something to consider. All right. Something to consider. The U.S. will free Hong Kong just to make them furries and feminists. It's true. That's if it did happen, that's basically what you would see. Very true. So Putin is trying to get Russia back together. Yeah, but Putin is basically, I mean, is he always successful at it? No, but I think his intention is basically to rebuild like traditional Russia, right? Pre-Soviet kind of, Western European, Western culturally, right? Christian Russia, and I think that's noble. I don't know. It's not like he's perfect at it, but I think that it's pretty clear. Like that's kind of what his leaning is toward. That's what he wants, And if we want to bring back like traditional Christian America and traditional Christian, like Western civilization or whatever, how would you not say that this is kind of a natural alliance, not between American liberals and like the Russian government or like the political establishment of the Russian government, but like us, right? Us as and kind of like the Russian right. I don't see how it's not the case. But anyways, guys, that wraps up we're going to do Q&A. So if you're watching on live replay, you're watching on the live stream, don't go anywhere. But that'll wrap up the replay aspect of this. So if you're watching on the replay, I'm going to do Q&A with a live chat right now. And if you want to watch that part, we're going to cut it off here. We're going to cut off the replay here. But if you want to watch it, be sure to become a member. I'll have like the full stream, including the Q&A up on the members tab soon. But if not, hope you enjoyed. Hope you have a very good night. All right. God bless you. See you guys later, and peace. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to like, and be sure to consider becoming a member, like I said. But if not, see you guys later. Peace.
In leaving it, I do so with this prayer. May God's grace be with you in all the days ahead.
He is a globalist, and we are nationalists. He believes in some Pax Universalis. We believe in the old republic. He would put America's wealth and power at the service of some vague new world order. We will put America first. So today we call for a new patriotism, where Americans begin to put the needs of Americans first. For a new nationalism, where in every negotiation, be it arms control or trade, the American side seeks advantage and victory for the United States. And the people of this country need to recapture our capital city of Washington from lobbyists and registered agents of foreign powers who are hired to look out for everybody and everything except the national interest of the United States. And our Western heritage is going to be handed down to future generations and not dumped onto some landfill called multiculturalism.